Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 54 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening! Janir couldn't face Amilla at supper that night. Despite her promise to Cerilius, she couldn't bring herself to go at all. Folded into her warmest clothes, she climbed to the most deserted battlement she could find. Knistreth had warned her about getting caught alone by Slavish guards. Not all of them were honorable, she had warned. As a precaution, Janir kept her carcatan buckled soundly at her side. No one ventured out here anyway. The walls were in disrepair and too close to the mountain for anything larger than a handful of men to sneak through. Even if a small force could get past, they would still be met with the lookouts just a few hundred paces in. It wasn't worth guarding. Janir hugged her arms tight around her chest and stamped feeling back into her feet. It was freezing, but she meant to wait out here until Amilla was asleep. She'd told Cerilius at the time she would head to her room, and the lie had stung. But she couldn't deal with Amilla, and thoughts of Saoven. Come to think of it, they would all search for her when she wasn't in bed. This plan wasn't going to work. Janir paused, the golden glow of magic catching her attention. Fear slid down her spine as she spun around, heart pounding. Out of reflex, she reached for her carcatan, but didn't draw them. Out for a bit of fresh air? A familiar figure in an oversized robe stepped onto the battlements, clambering up from the ground level. Easy. It's not like I stand a chance against you. The red-headed enchanter stuffed his hands in his pockets, peering up at the stairs. So, how are you this evening? Janir didn't reply. Warring instincts of logic and eerie calm, even relief, battled within her chest. Yeah, me too. Carlisle exhaled, kicking at a loose stone. They'll kill you as a spy if you're caught. Janir did her best to hide it as her temple throbbed with a piercing pain, just as it always did when she questioned the past. Whomever had tortured her had wanted her to forget. Carlisle shrugged. Let them try. No one's had much luck with it so far. Why are you here? Janir folded her arms across her chest. Are you alone? I'm not about to leave my best friend, even if she doesn't remember me. Carlisle took a step closer, carefully, as if he might spook her. I don't know you. Janir took a step back. She felt dirty saying that. Carlisle stopped, chewing the inside of his cheek thoughtfully. Where's Saoven, Janir? She looked away. I don't know. What are they doing to him? Stop! Janir screamed, fists jolting rigidly to her sides. Stop it! They were going to kill him if I... She trailed off, the words escaping her. Carlisle cocked his head to the side. They're using him to control you. Janir buried her face in her hands. I don't know what's happening. I don't know why it hurts so much. Please, please, please just leave me alone. Janir. Something tickled the edge of her awareness. Power, golden and shifting, like sunlight seen through water. Two sources of it, closing in from behind. You tricked me, she cried, barely registering Carlisle's look of confusion before she dashed back the way she had come. She'd barely gone 3 steps when the dappled source of power came careening from the side, and a hard fist slammed into her stomach. Janir didn't even have the breath to scream as she crashed headlong into the snow. She rolled onto her side to see a figure with silvery, almost luminescent hair, indistinct through her tears of pain. Coughing, she slid her carcatan from their sheaths and held them under her prone body. She might be about to die, but by the unnamed essence, she was not going gently. Her attacker reached for her, and she lunged, swinging with her carcatan. He jerked back with inhuman speed, and she missed. Someone kicked her in the back, sending her sprawling in the snow again with a muffled whimper of pain. An elf woman, with swan's feathers in her braided hair, held an ivory-plated saber to Janir's throat. "Take off your carcatan belt, Argatalum." A moment later, when Janir didn't move, the elf woman jabbed the tip of her saber against her cheek. "Do it." With fumbling hands, Janir reluctantly obeyed. "You said you just wanted to talk with her." Carlisle grabbed the arm of the nearest elf, but the man just shook him off. "Silence, or you'll alert the guards." The elf man snarled. "We're taking her somewhere we can talk in private." "Now put your carcatan in it," the elf woman ordered Janir, "and buckle them in." The elf woman must know about the Argatalum talent of summoning their rods. Janir complied, and in another moment, the elf woman had both carcatan while Janir was made defenseless. She was afraid, so afraid she thought she might be sick. The elves were on her in an instant. They gagged her, tying the rope so tight it cut into the corners of her mouth. Janir tried to fight back, but it was no use. Even Carlisle's hushed protests did nothing. The elves traded a low conversation in their own language before one of them seized each of her arms, and they dragged her off into the forest. They were both surprisingly strong. No matter how much Janir punched and kicked, it did no good. They carried her deeper and deeper into the forest until she was sure no one could hear her screams for miles. The trees were too dense to see more than a few hundred paces at most. An army could be hidden out here, and no one would ever know. In a small glen, they threw her to the ground, sending her head first against a pine trunk. Dizzy and disoriented, Janir pushed herself onto her hands and knees. She had bruised her shoulder. A cut on her cheek had ripped open, and the sharp throbbing in her temple was back yet again to accompany 100 more tiny injuries and hurts. Ripping her gag out, she scrambled away as fast as she could on the ground. "Please!" Carlisle came rushing after them. "It's Janir. She doesn't—" The male elf was unsympathetic. "Sister, take the enchanter. Make sure we weren't followed." The elf woman asked him a question in Elvish. The elf man replied in the common tongue. "Definitely." "I'll be close if you need me," she told him. "Be careful, Velasquez." Then the elf woman grabbed Carlisle's sleeve. He resisted, but she growled something to him, and he followed compliantly, casting anxious glances over his shoulder. "Don't hurt her. You agreed not to hurt her." Before she even heard him move, Velasquez grabbed her by the throat. He yanked her to her feet and slammed her against the pine. She kicked and clawed like a trapped animal, but he held her fast. He leaned so close their faces almost touched. Velasquez's fingers coiled around her neck as tight as possible without strangling her. There was several heartbeats of silence. Sickening silence. Then he exploded. "Janir K. Urson Argatalum, you traitorous, poisonous little meretrix." Velasquez snarled. He cuffed her, sending a stinging pain through her entire head and refreshing the welt on her cheek. He shoved her back and then paced away, as if he were afraid of what he'd do if he didn't. Janir's face throbbed hot and tender, but it was among the least of her worries. I don't understand. I trusted you. Velasquez growled, voice dropping to a frighteningly low volume. Janir shook her head in confusion. Please, I don't know what you're talking about. The elf whirled on her. I am speaking of your betrayal after my son saved your life. His commendation of you to the High Lords? Or the fact that he went after you when he thought that you had been abducted? Velasquez demanded. The elf began muttering to himself. I should have made Armandius kill you at the Norwin Pass. Janir shivered at those words, but she tried to hide it. Velasquez whirled on her. Did you think of what this betrayal would do to him? Who? Janir pressed her back harder against the tree, as if she could disappear into it. Armandius, Plantagenet, Curliston, Caerson. He raised you for 8 years. That's not possible, Janir countered, her voice nearly a whisper. Velasquez blinked. What? I haven't been to Brevia since the Brevians murdered my mother. Velasquez paused. After your mother died, Armandius Caerson became like a father to you. Nearly trembling, Janir answered honestly, but the conviction was leaving her. You're lying. The elf didn't even move. He stared with an emptiness. Finally, he spoke. You're not trying to reason with me. You haven't asked Carail's help. I have always called you a threat, and I have the chance to end you. You're clever enough to know it, too. He shoved a shock of hair from his face. Carail would appear to be your only hope, but you haven't said a word to him. You do not remember anything after your mother's death, do you? How did these people know that? First Saoven, now Velasquez. Janir found herself shifting when her unease became too much. Carail told me that you could not remember, but I did not believe him. All the fire and fury went out of the elf like a light. He suddenly looked old and worn, a dull gleam in his eyes. I know what they must have done to you to achieve this, Velasquez said, sympathy softening his tone. I did try, Janir stammered. What? I did try. But Saoven, he wouldn't leave me. Where is he now? Do you know? Janir's lip trembled. She would not cry in front of her captors. She would not. He's there. What? Velasquez demanded. What? Amila. She's supposed to break him. Velasquez turned away and raked his fingers through his hair in a slow, deliberate motion. Who is Amila? My cousin. Janir smeared away the tears. I can hear Saoven at night, screaming. The memory of Saoven's cries wrenched her very soul. It was why she was in this mess to begin with. For a moment, she thought Velasquez was going to say something, but he remained silent. How did you find me? She whispered, fear constricting her throat. The Constancy Star. Velasquez clipped. The stone Saoven gave you. Janir should have thrown the thing out. Yet she couldn't bring herself to part with it. It had been nestled safely beneath her shirt, weighted over her heart. There was something about the stone that felt sacred. Wait here. Without another word, Velasquez turned his back and marched to where the elf woman had taken Carail. Janir pressed her back against the pine. If she'd thought she had a chance at running, she would have, but the elves could easily chase her down. Even if she threw away the Constancy Star, the snow would leave too many tracks. Velasquez must have known that as well as she did. When the elf finally returned, He came with the elf woman and Janir's carcotton belt.
You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.